Welcome, everyone. Please, those who are in the back, it's much nicer if you stand in the front, and we feel much more of a community. If it's possible to move a bit forward, some of you, that would be lovely. Welcome to this second panel, which is a policy panel that I have the pleasure to moderate. I'm Isabel Schwarz from the European Culture Foundation in Amsterdam. Some of you who were there earlier have seen our president, Prince Laurentien of the Netherlands. And we have the great delight, pleasure, and honor to partner in the organization of this afternoon with Francesca Thyssen-Bornemisza and the National Thyssen-Bornemisza Museum. It's wonderful to be here. I said to Francesca on one of the Zooms, it has been since always one of my favorite museums ever. And I never thought I would ever be here moderating a panel. So great opportunity. This panel is, as I mentioned, it's a policy panel, and it will focus essentially on two things. One is looking at cultural emergency needs and cultural emergency responses, both from the local, public, private, philanthropic side and from the side of the European institutions. And it will also look already at recovery. So for some of you, it might look really incredibly difficult in these times of loss, of pain, of death, and of darkness to imagine more light and a better future. But actually, some around this table, or this round table, are working exactly on this, on the creation of the future and involving exactly these kind of active, dynamic voices we have heard earlier: artists, urbanists, engineers, philosophers, academics, in that imaginary process. So I would like this panel also to be the one of the opening of a different perspective and a European perspective. So it's also a European panel. So to discuss this, the now and the future, I have a wonderful panel with me, and I will start with Catherine. Catherine Magnant, who is the deputy to the director and the head of culture policy at the Directorate for Education and Culture of the European Commission. Then I have Alexander Shevchenko. Alexander, who made the impossible possible, who had been a more than 2 days travel to come here in extremely difficult situations and difficult conditions. So wonderful to have you here from Kiev, and who will speak to us about the project Restart Ukraine. Then on my right, Yana Barinova. Yana is from Kiev originally. She has been advising the Ministry of Culture and Information Policy, first, then moved on as Director of Culture at the department of the ministry, so the Director of Culture of Kiev municipality. And in March, left her country with her daughter and lives now in Vienna and works for the Erste Foundation. And then on my right, last not least, Diego Mellado, who is former ambassador to Lima for the European Union, who is now head of strategic communications and public policy at the EU's, officially it's called European External Action Service. It's basically the Foreign Affairs Office and Security Office of the European Union. And I would like to start with something on the screen that is a video, because someone who was also invited today but couldn't make it, unfortunately, but recorded a message for us today, but also for the broader cultural community in Ukraine, but also in Europe by and large. And this is Pina Picierno, who is the Vice President of the European Parliament. If you could please show the video.
Buonasera, voglio innanzitutto ringraziare Francesca Thyssen-Bornemisza e tutti i gentili ospiti presenti. Sono davvero molto lieta e anche onorata di poter contribuire a questo panel, che è un'occasione importante per discutere della situazione in Ucraina, dell'importanza della cultura e del ruolo vitale della solidarietà europea. Devastazione, miseria, morte sono le conseguenze dell'attuale guerra in Ucraina. Dopo 9 mesi di guerra la violenza sembra davvero non fermarsi, e insieme alla tragica perdita di vite umane, all'inestimabile distruzione di siti culturali, questo conflitto minaccia direttamente la cultura ucraina. E noi dobbiamo proteggere e salvaguardare lo spazio culturale, gli artisti, anche la creatività ucraini. Tuttavia la cultura non è soltanto qualcosa da proteggere, la cultura rimane anche una inestimabile forza trasformatrice e da sempre svolge un ruolo cruciale per mobilitare idee e anche per dare speranza. Resistere alla guerra di Putin significa anche promuovere la cultura ucraina e riaffermare i valori europei. La cultura è un potentissimo strumento per contrastare la brutalità di questo conflitto, un motore di cambiamento che può contribuire a raggiungere la pace grazie all'attivismo di artisti, di figure culturali, di professionisti, di creativi e di organizzazioni. Allora, in pieno spirito di solidarietà europea, l'Unione Europea sostiene fermamente la protezione del patrimonio culturale ucraino. E però dobbiamo fare di più, dobbiamo cooperare di più con l'UNESCO, con le organizzazioni locali ed europee e coniugare gli sforzi europei e nazionali. Dobbiamo promuovere la cultura per avvicinare le comunità, dobbiamo rafforzare la nostra resilienza e dare forma ad un futuro europeo migliore basato su valori condivisi e su una maggiore solidarietà. Grazie. Buonasera, voglio innanzitutto ringraziare Francesca Thyssen-Bornemisza e tutti i gentili ospiti presenti. Sono davvero molto lieta.
I think this message of Pina Picierno sets already very well the frame of this panel debate, because it illuminates the need to safeguard and protect cultural spaces. And when I speak about cultural spaces, I include media, artists and cultural heritage, and the creativity that is there on the ground in Ukraine, still surviving, resisting, and using culture also as a force of resistance. And it also is exemplary in the way that it's a message to us, that it says there's a lot already happening, a lot of solidarity in action, but we need more. And what this is about is, what is this more? And what could a European cultural deal for Ukraine encompass politically, programmatically, and funding-wise? So I'd like to start with Catherine Magnant. From the European Commission's perspective, I mean, you have been very, very active right at the start of war in Ukraine in activating within the Commission all kinds of programs, funding initiatives, and also thinking about emergency needs and how Europe can respond. That's your first.
Merci Isabelle, thank you, and good afternoon everyone. I'd like to start by expressing my gratitude to Francesca Thyssen-Bornemisza for making this happen, this historical exhibit, and also to the museum, of course the museum, the National Museum Thyssen-Bornemisza, very important to mention them as well. Yeah, I mean, indeed, I work for the European Commission, is the executive branch of the EU, and I think I can say that I'm proud of what we've been doing for Ukraine so far. I'd like to start with a quote, and a quote from the President von der Leyen of the European Commission. That comes from a speech she pronounced just a few days ago, and I think it summarizes well, where we stand on the war. And she said, "We know our Ukrainian friends will overcome this tragedy because they are strong and because their cause is just. And we, as EU, stand by them as long as it takes." So that's a very, very strong commitment from the side of the EU. And what have we done? Well, I think the first thing I'd like to recall is the fact that in 2 weeks, I mean, the war took us all by surprise, right? Nobody could believe it was happening. It started on the 24th of February, and on the 4th of March already, the 27 countries of the EU had agreed to give a temporary protection status to all Ukrainian refugees coming to whatever of those 27 countries. What does this mean? It gave Ukrainian refugees the right to stay in the EU for 1 year, the right to work, the right to access education, the right to access medical, assistance, and welfare. That was, in place in 2 weeks. And I witnessed that personally because I happened to speak Russian a little bit. So I offered, my services just to translate. And I could see with my eyes, I went to this far away, commune called Molenbeek in Brussels, which is not a very affluent one. And it was amazing. Indeed, in one meeting, this Ukrainian person who was from Odessa, by the way, got a medical appointment, got his, everything in order, and started receiving financial assistance. So I think it's important to remind that. It's also important to remind that Ukraine was offered the status of a candidate country to the EU, so that's a super clear political signal. And then, of course, comes the assistance, right? I mean, this is a country at war and a country which needs everything. So in terms of emergency assistance, it's 74,000 tons of in-kind equipment, so concrete stuff, which has been brought and sent to Ukraine so far. So 74,000 tons. In terms of funding, money, it's 20 billion euros altogether since the beginning of the war, macro financial assistance, support to the budgets, equipment, rehabilitation of schools when that is possible, etc. So I think, coming back to where I started, I think I'm proud of what we've been doing so far, and we've got to continue. So now the topic today is culture. So what are we doing for culture? So here again, a mix of emergency and short-term assistance for the time being. In terms of emergency assistance, we granted 2 million euros to a foundation called Alif, so that they could, send wrapping, bubble paper, and all sorts of equipment to just protect paintings, help the Ukrainian cultural professionals protect the buildings and what was to be protected. And then now we are also putting in place something which is a bit more sustainable and which aims at really helping Ukrainian artists and cultural professionals. So we have a funding program called Creative Europe, and we've opened it to Ukrainian professionals. We have agreed that, through this scheme, our book printing scheme, normally, we always accompany it with translation, but it's okay for, Ukraine. They can print books in Ukrainian without translation in European languages, because that's very important to the refugees who are in Europe. We, as part of Creative Europe, we also launched in October a mobility scheme to allow artists to travel, right? I mean, to do a period of creation in another country or residency, and that's also open to Ukrainian artists. And for them, we put in place a special mechanism of online mobility when they cannot physically travel. We know how difficult it is. So just those are a few examples. We recently launched a call, a 5 million euro call, to identify organizations who could help us redistribute small grants to artists and cultural professionals on the ground. So that's what's happening at the moment.
Thank you. Thank you, Catherine. Now I would like to ask you, Diego. I mean, you are in charge of the EU's public policy and the cultural dimension within public policy. And culture is often referred to as the software and the soft power of Europe. And now, of course, culture can also be a weapon. I mean, in this case, we mentioned a form of a force of transformation, but also a weapon. And I would be interested to hear from you what's your thinking now in the political strategic sphere that you are working on. How do you see culture having a very particular role now, but also in the future on your political strategic envisioning of the future? And then also recalling that in 2017, the ministers actually called for a more integrated, coherent and step-by-step approach of international cultural relations. So how does this unfold now regarding Ukraine?
Right. Thank you. Thank you very much. And let me start also by thanking Francesca Thyssen-Bornemisza, the foundation, also, of course, Konstantin Deniza, all those who have made this exhibition possible. I mean, this is an amazing achievement, and it's great that we can also support it by our presence with my colleague Catherine from the European institutions. And indeed, I mean, Catherine was exposing what we have been doing concretely, but yeah, from a more political angle and point of view, I think that we have to remember where we are and why this is happening. Why this incredible story about this exhibition, as Konstantin was explaining. Also, I was reading about how the truck, how to try, how to go through the war zone and cross in the Polish area, how you, Alexander, took you 2 days to come, and why? Why is this happening? It's because we are at war, because Europe, there is war in Europe. And we cannot forget that. I mean, this is not an anecdote in this situation. This is not like the background. It is not the background. It is the essence. The essence is that today there is again war in Europe. And this is how the world is seeing us, by the way, because my job is also to deal with the projection of Europe outside of our borders, and the world is seeing us that way, as again, the Europeans in the middle of a war. And I think it's very important to see that in this war, actually, culture is also a weapon, as you were saying. Culture is also a victim, and culture is a target, is an objective. And this is why, from the European Union, we consider that this is our fight as well. This is why we are displaying this enormous amount of solidarity. It is not just solidarity, we're defending our interests. The interests of Ukraine are the interests of the European Union. This is the reality. This is how close we are now. And your culture is our culture as well. And we need to make sure that this is one of the aspects of this common fight. So it's very important that culture is at the center, and that's why I believe also that this idea of a cultural deal is so important. But even more than that, because what we have today also is a more revisionist world. It's not just the invasion and the attack, the brutal attack against Ukraine, which is here at stake. There's more than that. This is a new way of looking at international relations, a new way of looking at how we interact as people from different countries, from different cultures, from different political systems, from different economic systems. All this is happening right now, coming from China, coming from Russia, coming from other parts of the world. And we see that in every international meeting, whether it is the G20, the G7, now the COP27 on climate change, or anything is now governed by this new approach. And very often those who want a revisionist approach to international relations, they use culture. If you look at, whatever comes now from China, from Russia in particular, culture is very present. It is also seen as a cultural fight, as culture wars. This is how they label it. And this is what you see in their propaganda. And this is also in the case of Ukraine, why specifically they target Ukrainian culture, because there is a specific angle in this war, in this invasion, which is the complete destruction of Ukrainian culture by the Russian state. So this is, quite specific, but it is present everywhere. So we need to make sure that culture is part of our international relations. That's why we put it so centrally in international relations. And from the European Union, we think that we have an asset that regarding culture, us, the Europeans, with also our American friends, with our allies, we have an asset that we can use, because we have a very strong cultural projection, but we can also offer the world a new approach, a more dimension of co-creation, of working together in defining the type of cultural relations that we want, that should govern international relations. We are much more open. We can accept dialogue. We can accept criticism. I mean, I've been discussing with some of you about, the questioning of the European colonial past. We accept that. We accept it completely. We're open to that. And this is not the case today. When you look at what's happening, the cultural redefinition of Russia, there is absolutely no space for criticism, no space for an alternative view. And even worse, if you look at China and others. So I want to be very specific, very concrete, because there's a very strong geopolitical dimension, and we cannot forget it. And for the young people, we have very young people here, you know, I'm very happy to see that you're joining us. You should think about that, because this is the future. And this is going to be our new future, you know. I mean, we've been lucky, many of us, we've had the last 30 years of a very peaceful international relations and environment where, in fact, the world was flat, or we thought. It was the end of history. It was great, because everybody wanted to be like us and to share our cultural you know, the development. Well, apparently it's not the case. And this is how the future will be defined. We have an asset, we have to use it. What we see in Ukraine now is very important. Let's put culture at the center of this common fight. The fight of Ukraine is ours. Ukraine will win. I mean, if you're Ukrainian in this room, you're on the winning side, and this is great, because this is exactly what we want. And at the same time, let's make sure that, you know, culture will be part of our international relations. So indeed, you know, this idea of a cultural deal is quite interesting, and we should definitely continue discussing about that. Thank you.
I'm glad to hear this, that you have also this aspiration to put culture at the center. And in the second round, where we'll go, and how will we substantiate this concretely then politically for the deal? Now to you, Yana. I mean, you are making already the bridge, like many others of your generation, also to having one foot in Ukraine, and your heart certainly in Ukraine, but living now outside and have an external view also of this. You have also been able to identify the numerous needs that they are on the ground, on the grassroots level, both in terms of emergency, midterm, but also long-term needs. And here we have different partners. We have donors, we have international donors, European donors, we have municipalities also, who are very important players, foundations. How would you assess the situation now? What is really, from your perspective, having worked on the ground also, where is the greatest need of help, of assistance, and of investment? Because I think that's also important to underline. It's not just about assistance.
Thank you. Do you hear me well? Does it work?
I do,
No.
but I'm here.
Do you hear me well?
Yes, now.
So also I want to thank Francesca for organizing this event. Thank you very much. I think that it is very much about capacity building and about people who are capable to implement reforms, about people who are capable to deliver these results. What we launched with the Erste Foundation, what I initiated, it's project, we call it Policy Labs, and some people from this room will join us in few days in Vienna. So it's about community of professionals with different optics, policymakers, decision makers, different stakeholders, cultural workers. They should come together and via fruitful discussion and dialogue to negotiate the solution. The biggest problem, according to my view, lies on the legislative sphere. We have many gaps in law that should be harmonized, that should be synchronized with European Union standards, and we will be forced to do this, especially having this European Union candidate status. So it's about a group of people who will intend to work on this. So I would call European foundations and European institutions to launch probably programs to train, to mentor, to coach Ukrainian professionals, both from government sector and from independent sector, to join our efforts and to learn, let's say, best practices and synthesize this experience, and then to elaborate our unique approach, because in the end responsibility lies on our shoulders to bring Ukraine to this result. And the policy lab, it's one of examples. how we want to train people and to create a community of committed people. And also what is very much needed is pan-European cultural agenda for Ukraine, where we prioritize what is needed, and any European and international foundation, they need evidence-based information. So it's not enough to send a wish list of what is needed. European foundations, international foundations, they need sense of belonging to the process, how you identify these needs, how you prioritize this. So it takes time. So as soon as possible, it would be good to launch this process of, let's say, joint exploration, what is really needed right now. And we even now, I witness total mess with financial support to Ukraine, and it will be even worse. So many NGOs, many international foundations, so they try to match with each other. So what I feel that some new powerful institutions should appear to boost this process. I witness great Ukrainian institutions are fighting for their existence. So we do need support, but this should be very carefully planned. Together with Ukrainian experts, it should be from bottom up. It won't work if some great experts will elaborate something and then grant it. We should sit together, we should organize brainstorm sessions, we should map urgent needs, and then we should design long-term. This is extremely important. It can 3-5 years program or new foundation. I like very much example of European Fund for Balkan countries, for example, that was established by Erste Foundation and Boch Foundation and other European foundations. So they understood that they need an instrument to implement all their projects, because their in-house project managers, they can't embrace this enormous scope of work. And this is how European Fund for Balkan countries appeared. And I think it's great examples. They launched internships for government servants. They launched fellowships for journalists, for the independent media. So many things could be done, and strong European stakeholders, foundations should come together and to consolidate their efforts and to negotiate the optimal solution. So this would be my vision and my advice. And of course, people is the main asset who will in the end rebuild Ukraine. I witness so many rebuild approaches, reconstruct approaches, renew approaches, but people in the end decide everything. So I would invest in people and their capacity to deliver.
So basically invest in infrastructure. So we had the rebuild, relaunch, reconstruct, and now we have restart. Alexander, you are doing exactly that, what we saw earlier, which was fascinating from 19 to 1930s, this very vibrant artistic scene which brought together these very different disciplines together. And that's exactly what you are doing too. And not only disciplines from the arts, but from the academia, from urbanism, architecture, in reimagining urban and rural cultural spaces. And I think that's very important, because very often we focus on the cities, and cities are extremely, extremely important, but it's not just about cities. So Alexander, I think you have prepared some slides for us and want to introduce to us Restart Ukraine and how you work in this interdisciplinary manner, and also in terms of the quality standards that you set for the future, which is really interesting, this transformation by not rebuilding the same thing back, but restarting differently. Alexander.
Okay. Sí, buenas tardes todas y todos. Estoy muy feliz de estar aquí en España otra vez.
Hello, good evening to everyone. I'm really happy to be here in Spain again. And thank you very much to everyone that has made this possible.
I will switch to English and the slides are over here, and I will have them also on my phone.
I thought he was going to speak Spanish.
Thanks. So, right, I'm Ukrainian urban planner, and I was working as a leader of private consultancy before the war has started. So my relation to art and culture is that I can apply for Creative Europe. So it's in the same family of creative industries, but the approach we take is slightly different from what we were hearing in the first panel, which is another world which I admire a lot, but we do not often intersect. However, this story took another loop, and what we see now, this war is not only war against the cities and the infrastructure. This war is against Ukrainian culture, and this was mentioned by many people in this panel. This is the essence of why things happen as they happen today, right? Within this paradigm, it is much more clear for me how to rebuild future Ukrainian cities if I would. And protecting culture is not only in the museums. So yeah, you can put a vest on every picture, every piece of art. However, it goes beyond, and it is important. It is important from our perspective to overlay this culture protection with the spatial dimension of what is going on in Ukraine, because really it's not only in the museums. The culture goes beyond. The culture is in the air currently in Ukrainian cities. And we talk here about the memory, we talk here about the social recovery, which is very much adjacent to the concept of culture in general. So what we're doing in our NGO, in our project called Restart Ukraine, we suggest we go beyond sectors. We suggest we go beyond environmental cluster, environmental silos, economic infrastructure, culture. It's all united together in the spatial component of the city. So we suggest these 9 clusters going step by step in a certain approach to the recovery. And as it was said, that we need an evidence-based approach where we do not invent from air, but we use the previous experience, the previous expertise of other countries, but we localize that best practices to our context. And we keep it not only as a post-war, but future-oriented approach. So this is the typology, the methodology which we work in. And I would like to stop on the next slide a little bit more, because there is a clear waterline in current recovery in Ukraine. And you have, let's say, tangible and intangible recovery, which are sometimes very parallel streams and which do not intersect. I will maybe open you a secret that today in Ukraine, a recovery is very exclusive process. It is a circle of very specific stakeholders, and not everyone is yet included. One reason it is a very short time, but knowing how things might happen in Ukraine, it can be easily the next trajectory. So here, I wanted to emphasize the culture as a consequence of national idea, because right now what we see in Ukraine is that we are looking for effective solutions amongst skilled people, and somehow we say, okay, we'll recover culture later. But then it doesn't really match, because the process are on the different stage of the development. But in my opinion, if we place culture as our DNA within our understanding of this agenda, that will logically form this flow where tangible and intangible will intersect and create this synergy. Because what we see from also post-war recovery in other countries, like in Balkans, it is not enough to rebuild the built environment. It is very important to build people back. And how do you work with people working with the environment? It's like another level of this integrity and intersectoral experience, which right now it's not yet there. So what we do is we try to suggest a toolbox, because we are a team of 15 people, different expertise, and we can go one by one recovering cities and municipalities with the limited capacity and limited expertise we have. But we selected to unite people around a toolbox, which is a shared approach to recovery based on data, based on this intersectoral approach, and based on practices and cases and pilots we discuss, and not take the first iteration for granted. This is something which we feel is very important. It is impossible to develop the best scenario from first attempt here. So we need to have places for innovation, places for iterations, and then multiply them around Ukraine. So I will try to be as specific as possible on our pilot case, which is Chernihiv, which is a city in the north of Ukraine, which was liberated in April. It was surrounded and then it was liberated. So how do we take culture spatially? So we took a very easy exercise mapping those points of cultural heritage and significance and memory of those people around the city. And we need to make sure those places are not rebuilt with its shopping malls, and other places, which totally disconnect us today from the reality for the future generations. So when we say spatially, that means that on the next map, which is integrated, where you have infrastructure, economy, parks, and everything, it is part of spatial dimension. It is not a picture in the museum. It is present and it is real. So here, I also wanted to give you an example of destroyed library in Chernihiv, and the discussion which is going on right now. The ceiling of the discussion is like, who will take the responsibility to recover this library? However, in my opinion, as an urban planner, if we look at least like 100 meters around this place, we can see much more synergies than only a library and books inside and the interior and other recovery. So my personal belief is that this approach is possible. Not everyone is interested in that, of course, because it makes things complicated, it makes things longer. However, I definitely see if we live now in a radically different times and we don't know what will happen in the future. I would take the risk, and I actually took already the risk to switch to this, I know, work of the lifetime perhaps, to create cities of Ukraine for future, at least a little bit better than they used to be. And that's what we talk about, building back better. And the last but not least, if we talk practically about what is it about? So yes, there is microfinancing support. There is a fast response and humanitarian response from various organizations. But it's very important to shift from this fast response to a strategic thinking. And this shift, the very moment of this shift, is very painful. And for many stakeholders, because you need to stop doing things in the way you did it yesterday and start doing them on the new day in the other way, and start listening to other stakeholders and other NGOs and invite business to the discussion, because not all the money will come from the European Commission and the confiscated funds. It should be private investment. So my point here is that mobile and effective and cross-sectorial initiatives as ours, not only ours, but there is plenty of such in Ukraine, they need to survive. That's the key. They need to live over this winter. This is essential, because people are the capacity and people change their jobs very quickly. You don't believe how quick urban planner can shift to IT. Weeks. And this capacity in Ukraine was really limited. And right now, in case we want them to do something in the future, we need them support now. And right now I'm here and there is electricity, heating and water. However, last week was not the same case for us, and working in such conditions, it's also a bit complicated. So I will stress 3 points, like wind infrastructure support. It's very basic, but it helps people work in day to day. Then institutional partnership. Unlike the previous years of second decade of this century, where the programming of donors was always very like rectangular and square, there is need for a bit more flexibility and so that you can adjust to the bottom-up needs. And the third one is global integration, and that's what's happening now. And I just believe that it should be multiplied several times, that Ukrainians are part of these kind of discussions. And yeah, I will stop here.
Congratulations already that you're doing this under these current conditions, and also that you're referring to others who are similar ambitions, similar visions, and not only starting on Restart Ukraine. I would be interested to hear from you, Alexander. You said not everyone is interested in this. Not everyone, meaning in Ukraine, in the international European side, because it means thinking long term, because it means hard work, because
maybe two, and one is essential inside the country. I would say there is like a push, a lobby for quick steps and quick development, which in our understanding is something we need to think long and then build fast. So yeah, the point is like excluding different sectors like environment, like social component, like culture, like post-trauma recovery to the program. So right now there is definitely a push, because it's a business, it's a market, there is a push from the developers to get their piece of pie, and you see it everywhere in the global forums, in Davos, in Lugano. Like it's something not usually mentioned, but it happens. And the other one is maybe the lack of the understanding of the context. That bridge is very small and not everyone is present there.
And many don't see culture as part of the solution, no? But part of the problem. So do you see maybe one last question on this, Alexander, is do you see such projects as a force of mobilization of local communities to reinvent themselves? And how do you approach them? How do you work with municipalities? I mean, how does it concretely work?
That is ironical, but municipalities here are much closer to like kind of perfect picture in the future than bigger cities, because Ukraine has launched the decentralization reform. It wasn't finished yet, but already municipalities have received some certain autonomous state, and they got this sense of freedom and independence by themselves, so they can define, they can spend their money. So right now what we do, we're trying to establish a certain type of marketplace where municipalities would be able to team up with the local urbanists and architects, which cannot find their applicability and their skills used by this mainstream recovery process, to also the international colleagues. Because myself talking in Sweden, Netherlands, Germany, United States, a lot of professionals are asking me, like, Alexander, how can you link us to the process, but to a meaningful process where we can make the change? So absolutely, these municipal, as you say, rural links can happen even without going through the central government. And this is the positivity of the situation.
Thank you. Thank you. We have 10 minutes more because we started 10 minutes late, and we have questions, which is great. I think Madame first here, please.
Thank you, Mike. Can you hear me? Yeah. My name is Tatiana Filevka. I present the Ukrainian Institute Kiev. And my question is to Alexander, I believe in Ukrainian, right? How do you coordinate with other similar initiatives? Because there are several, like the international group which is called Roskvit, which includes urban planners and architects from all over the world, or the Kharkiv School of Architecture that works also with different international architects. There is an initiative to reconstruct Borodanka and some other initiatives. So like, they all have similar approaches, but like, do you coordinate with each other, or you have like your own approach in every other city?
Thanks for the question. I think it is really important here that right after the war, there were dozens of organizations emerging like mushrooms after the rainfall, that everybody was very clear that he or she has the best idea of the recovery of the country, and that's definitely the case. Then throughout the 9 months, some of them disappeared because either lost the motivation or the finance resources, or they shifted to something else. Right now there is, if we talk about urbanism and architecture, there is, I would say, up to 10 different organizations with which we are in the dialogue, and it's complementary, because the problem is so big that it is impossible from one side to do everything. That's true, but from the other side, it is also impossible due to all these practical barriers and geographical differences. It's impossible, from my perspective, to do it in one big team altogether. So we coordinate with each other, we synchronize with each other. So Roskvit and Kharkiv School of Architecture is pretty much the same thing, which are working on this urban coalition for the cities and linking them together and finding out what are the way to recover. There are some certain attempts on first recovery, like in Borodanka, in Irpin, in Mykolaiv, in Kharkiv by Norman Foster Group Foundation. And this is all just pieces of bigger picture. What we selected for us to do is to first to create this database, which we all can rely on. And this is another topic, that there is also a number of these platforms. But we believe that creating this framework where we can link resilience with culture, with technical infrastructure, with environment is our strongest side. So we do what we do the best for a moment.
Thank you very much indeed. I represent universities. You've spoken about artists, you've spoken about professionals, but there is both a humanities and science network of trained people all over Europe within the university system who you haven't actually mentioned yet. And my understanding, including specific understanding of this year, where things began in February, is there is no technical way for universities to waive fees for students or supply extra maintenance grants, which are two different things. And it seems to me that bearing in mind the university networks that already exist, some form of integration, including pan-European integration, which took on board that they are there, the structures are there, the teaching is there, the young people are there, the welcome is there, but there is no technical way of avoiding their own administrative structures. The Marie Curie initiative, I know about, a European initiative, but it is postdoctorate. So it seems to me there is a very urgent need for the top level of European cultural representatives to address the question of universities, without which you would not have had Katya Denisova and this exhibition, because she belonged to a university. Oh, someone magically did something to my microphone. But thank you very much, everybody. Please think not only of scholarships, but a pan-European way of addressing the question of fees and maintenance in already existing courses.
I have a question to the last speaker, because it's an interesting topic. It's, you know, in my nightmares, I will see a group of Lord Norman Foster working in Kharkiv. It's a worst nightmare I have. And I want to address very simple thing. Conservative, restoration of the damaged architectural monuments. And now we are coming to a very interesting thing. We are talking about building and the essence. You showed us so-called building of Tarnowski Museum in Chernihiv, naming its library. It's never been a library. It's Soviet, let's say, accident that the building, when museum was, Chernihiv Museum vacated the building, was turned into use library. Actually, the building never was Tarnowski Museum because initially it was an orphanage. So the essence is changing. The architectural form is remaining. Where I can see chances on saving of this architectural form, especially in Ukraine. We know perfectly well that now we are crying for the buildings which were damaged by Russians, which were falling apart way before Russians appeared on the horizon. We have to protect our architectural legacy. It's not too much left. We can see cities which have empty dentals. We have seen barbarous architecture's exercises of the period of independence, starting with the beautiful hotel standing in the front of Potemkin steps and full collapse of zoning of Kiev with this, I am sorry to say, architectural tricks growing all around the city. We are in danger zone, and reconstruction could become very, very dangerous. You mentioned the danger of developers. It's unavoidable danger, the danger of corruption, which will be connected with developers, local and international. What is your take on reconstruction of architecture in this situation, historical architecture, which was damaged?
Thank you for your question. I maybe will answer. Does it work? Oh, no, it works. I will maybe try to answer you with the illustrative situation which happened in Kiev, where a missile hit more than 100 years building, which was damaged like 50%. So you have remaining half, which is like almost normal, and the other one is totally destroyed. And then, like I think throughout a week, there was a verdict of the expertise that this should be destroyed. However, the results of this expertise were never shown. So I think this is something we will be experiencing, and I think this is something we need to look at the level of the policy, not on the level of my opinion or somebody's opinion, because there is clear guidance about the reconstruction, and there is a huge international body which is dealing with that, and a lot of people from that body were reaching me saying like, hey, we are ready to come and to apply the international protocols to this and that. And they are there, and we are to collect the dots, to connect the dots. We're not there to create so-called Ukrainian bicycle. What I believe we can do and we should do is highlight this issue. What we can do and we should do is to unite those who are willing to participate and to creating this effect of a snowball. And once we have a big enough snowball, we can start talking to the other snowballs.
Thank you. One last question and then another round.
Thank you. And I was very, very impressed and intrigued by your speech, because you touched on questions which are very broad, beyond the question of the Ukrainian conflict, which are the role of culture in the world in the future. And in our digital age, it becomes clearly more important in the future. And you spoke about, so my question is about Europe in a way, and European identity, how you want to, how it can be, how we can use, I hate to say this in such a way, use, but use this tragedy to also do some serious self-interrogation rather than just it's a crisis to solve in Europe. There's a war now in Europe. Because the problem is also of how you can rebuild without nationalism. So how can you do that? And when you said colonialism can be addressed by Europeans and must be addressed, this is a case in point because Ukraine was colonized for many, also in the empire, Russian Empire. There were movements for a long time to eradicate the multicultural nature of that place. And that place, therefore, can also be a laboratory for the one thing that Europe has, which others don't have, which is that its identity is based on a plurality, as opposed to on a singular identity. It's neither French nor German and so on. And Ukraine was particularly like that. It was a country of Poles and Moldavs and people from all over. It was a boundary cross zone, many languages and so on. So this is the main kind of question and issue. And connected to this is, what about the fragility of Europe now? In the sense that, let's say that what happens in Italy happens in France and happens in Germany. What happens? We are now seeing a cultural shift. There is no real difference in terms of economic policies, but we see very quickly new nominations in museums and in cultural institutions with a repeat of a certain idea of identity connected with ancient Rome, for example, ancient Rome. It's very important again. And therefore, so what happens to the whole Ukrainian rebuilding if Europe is not exactly as it is now in a few years, but it is run by certain ideologies that don't have the idea that Europe is plurality, but have the idea of nation states?
Thank you. I think this is a very good bridge to the last comments of our dear speakers. Because of time, I think we could have at least an hour of conversation, and I think it's great to have this between we are facing each other.
Answer.
Yes, that's why, and that would be the point. It's the European dimension again. I mentioned at the beginning, this is a European panel. It's not about individual responses. It's how we can come to one joint vision, about one joint action, and how in this case, when we mentioned the European cultural deal for Ukraine, it's about bringing these different forces together in a European spirit. How would you pick up one element that you think is an absolute cornerstone of such a call for a European cultural deal? What would that response be? And I will start with you, Yana.
I don't think that it can be one and only component that will solve anything, but I do believe that some foundations, let's say, but behind any foundation, there are people, there are leadership of these foundations. They should unite and to elaborate a joint program towards Ukraine. Because again, what I witness now is that each foundation is launching and implementing their own, let's say, actions towards different Ukrainian cultural players. So in order, I think, to achieve the synergy effect, somebody should unite, sit together like Philea or different associations and to talk and to agree on, and the key is long-term commitment, because 1 year program is good, but it won't help, because I witness awful ruination and damage of crucial infrastructure in Ukraine. So the scope of efforts of our colleagues should be very solid and big. So I call for commitment and joint program, maybe new institutions that will manage this, because it's daily work. So this
So
I
about
think,
strategic collaboration of philanthropy, also in the long term.
yeah,
So it's
as
not just about
Alexander said,
projects.
he needs institutional partnerships. But again, what institutions? Who are these partners? How they will help Alexander's project, and how they will help other projects, as Tatiana asks. So in order to avoid this mess, as starts already as a snowball, as soon as possible, we should identify key organizations that see Ukraine as the geography where they want to put their efforts. For example, for Erste Foundation, Ukraine started to be a priority after the February 24th. The bank left Ukraine in 2012. So, and now Ukraine appeared on their radar, and we started to elaborate joint projects. So we see changes in the agenda of many, many European institutions. So at the early stage, they should talk to one another.
They do talk, but they don't necessarily act together. That's merci. Catherine.
Yes. Can you hear me? Because I've been, okay, thank you very much. Okay, so for me, there is a clear, I mean, this panel and the discussion we're having today, sorry for the noise. I mean, the key word for me, the key takeaway is co-creation and equal partnership. No reconstruction of Ukraine without the Ukrainians. It can seem obvious, but I know of the time pressure. I know of the pressure, you know, that can happen when there needs to be a delivery, fast delivery, etc. You mentioned the economic pressure, the economic interest, but there is also, you know, politically the wish that things go fast and go quickly to normal, back to normal. So that's something. What you've been pleading for today, going beyond silos, multidisciplinary approach, bottom-up, equal partnership, this is the way it should go, but it requires more time. It is more complicated than, you know, sitting, being isolated and deciding. So it's definitely the way to go, but it will be important to resist the time pressure. And the panel today was just a brilliant demonstration of the amazing minds and capacities that there are in Ukraine, and that you know, there is no way we cannot, you know, work in total partnership in thinking reconstruction. So just coming to culture, you know, I mean, we've done, we had the meeting in Warsaw with 21 representatives of the Ukrainian cultural sector to try and understand their needs and see what direction to go. So speaking just about culture, you know, all the grants we're giving for Creatives Europe, there will always be for Ukrainian, one Ukrainian partner as a requirement in the project. So that's one way to build this equal partnership, but we really have to anchor that principle, I would say.
Merci, Catherine. Alexander.
Short, yeah. Short is the key right now.
Long term and short.
Yeah, maybe I will just build on the last point which was made. Definitely there is a wish inside Ukraine for a quick economic recovery, which means like every next fiscal year we have like from 5 to 10 economic growth. But we need to critically answer the question, what is the price for that? Because like we, with the war, tend to forget very low-hanging crises and problems. We have not taken any lesson from the coronavirus because the war hit so fast. However, we had already the early signs of climate change, which has nothing to do with the culture, but it has something to do with the fresh water, with the environment. And this is something very urgent and to react on. So my key maybe takeaway here, we need to go parameters beyond only financial recovery and economic recovery. And we need to see this tangible, intangible, financial and financial cost benefit analysis. Otherwise, we will be like, sorry for giving maybe not very polite examples, Dubai, or look at the shore of Georgia or somewhere else. That's where we'll be heading. Thanks.
Well, I mean, I will connect probably with the last question also. I mean, just to give some answer, but you were saying what's the European dimension? What is the most important thing? And you mentioned that the European dimension is very fragile, and it's true. This is reality. The European dimension is fragile, but is also very powerful at the same time. And we need, as Europeans, and that includes Ukrainians, because Ukraine is part of the family now, it's a candidate country. I mean, we need to make sure that we can continue moving forward together, delivering very concrete things together. Because we will continue to have that, what you said. We will have democracy inside, but we will also have anti-liberal movements inside. We will continue to have pluralism, diversity, and then strong nationalism. We will continue to have the worst and the best inside the European system, even more than the Americans, for instance, our close brothers on this, the US, even more in Europe. But we need to stay focused, and we need to be less naive and to defend our interests and to make sure that we move forward, being stronger and projecting our interests, but our values as well, because we're capable of doing that. Others cannot. We can project interest, power, values. And we have to do it in a very intentional way as Europeans. But with all this fragility that we have within us, and making sure that, very strong allies, friends like Ukraine, that should be part of the EU in the future, stays connected and stays fully focused on the reforms and on delivering for its citizens and making sure that, it can go along the European Union. But it will be difficult and we will be challenged. And nobody believes entirely our narrative. There's a battle of narratives out there about how the world should look like in the future. In the past, we were very able to say, listen, this is how we want democracy, we want a Western liberal world for the future. That is not the only narrative, and this is not the only project out there. So we need to have that into account.
Thank you very much to all our panelists, to our public, our publicum, our public, to Francesca, also again from our side. It has been a very insightful, I think, panel. And thank you very much for your generosity, also your generosity for sharing. And I really hope that we are here together, that all of us can have a takeaway in the way that what are you in your position able to do to contribute to this vision of a united Ukraine in a united Europe. And this is not empty words. I really hope that you can take something of this with you and say, what can I do to help that? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It has been great.
Thank you.